Was the ending of My Hero Academia rushed? This is the question on my and many fans of My Hero Academia's mind. And in this video, I want to go over every plausible facet to determine if My Hero Academia's ending as a whole was actually rushed. Hey guys, how's it going? It is your boy, Manga Man Drew, and I'm pretty much going to be doing this entire video discussing whether or not the ending of My Hero Academia was actually rushed. This is something that has been discussed ever since the manga has ended, and I just want to throw in my own 2 cents to really understand why I do not think that the actual ending is rushed, and just really diving into what it means for a manga's ending to be rushed. And just to let you know that when it comes to this video, I'm not going to be determining whether or not the ending is good or bad, because you may have a seemingly rushed ending that is not necessarily a bad ending. And with that little pretense out the way, let's really dive into the discussion and really talk about what's going on with the ending of My Hero Academia. And just as a refresher, I'll quickly go over what the ending of My Hero Academia actually was, and then dive into why or what being rushed may entail. And pretty much, the ending of My Hero Academia pretty much begins with Deku defeating Tomura Shigaraki and us getting a relatively short 7-chapter epilogue, where we get to see the students begin to go back to school. We see the big 3 and their class graduate. We get the reveal that Aoyama is going to be leaving UA and Class 1A, as well as the promotion of Class 1A to 2A proper. We get to see them actually begin to understand where the world is going, as well as we get the conclusion of both the Todoroki family plotline, as well as Uraraka's plotline. We get to see Deku confront Spinner, as well as the conclusion of his story arc, which pretty much ends with a 8-year flash forward as we get a montage of what they did during their 3 years, as it's revealed that Deku is currently a teacher, and then eventually at the end, we get to see that he gets a suit that allows him to be a hero after he gave up that dream. And there's a lot there that I can make a video on its own for, but that's the general premise of what the ending of My Hero Academia was. And many people say that a lot of what we got in this moment was very much rushed due to the pacing of the epilogue itself. And this is where I really want to begin on talking about what it means for a series ending to be rushed. Because a series ending, to me, is being rushed when the mangaka themselves do not want to continue the story and wants the story to come to an end immediately, and or if the story is moving too fast, too suddenly, that it ends abruptly and very unsatisfactory. And a few endings that may be seen to be rushed, especially when it comes to shonen, could include series such as Yu Yu Hakusho as well as Bleach. In the case of Yu Yu Hakusho, we can see that the ending itself is very rushed, because the mangaka of Yu Yu Hakusho, Togashi, not only later confirmed in a sort of interview or volume extras of Yu Yu Hakusho that he was checked out of the series and wanted it to be finished, but that the final arc tournament came to an abrupt end and then immediately ended the entire series in 5 chapters afterwards. And when it comes to Bleach, the ending is also rushed because the final fight concluded without a clear understanding of what happened, and that we were told that Bleach was ending in 5 chapters later without anyone realizing that it was happening, and that the story didn't seem like it was ending that quickly. So as we've seen, at the very least, shonen series do have a track record of the ending being rushed, but does that necessarily apply to My Hero Academia? And there are a few factors that you could point to that could determine whether or not a series is being rushed. There are time constraints, there are pacing issues, there are the writer's health, as well as the complexity of story points, whether or not they were resolved or not. And it's from here that I really want to see if any of these reasons given fit into the ending of My Hero Academia. And with all of that, this is where the main crux of what I really want to discuss is going to come into play, and whether or not the ending of My Hero Academia can be applied to any of these reasonings, or any of these factors actually applying to the ending itself. So let's start off with the first part. So the main idea that many people have for the reasoning why My Hero Academia is being rushed is because Horikoshi said he wanted to end the series and wanted the series to be over, and that he was burnt out on the series. And this seems to be a very prominent reasoning and a very understanding reason for why the series may be rushed. If the mangaka doesn't want to work on the series, they'll rush through it to end it as soon as possible, as we've seen with other mangaka such as Togashi. But to me, this seems to be a misunderstanding of the comments made by Horikoshi himself in the past. Because here's the thing, and this is going to be calling out literally everyone in the fandom because of the idea that My Hero Academia fans can't read. And yes, that is including myself. I most definitely cannot read. I can barely read what I'm reading off right now in the script and going off the cuff. But Hori has never said that he wanted My Hero to end, but that My Hero Academia was coming to an end. The idea that My Hero Academia was ending and being rushed most likely started when Horikoshi said that My Hero Academia was going to end in 2023. And he made a very fun comment that, oh, if it doesn't end by then, that he's going to have his letter read to pretty much apologize and prostrate on his knees, and left another message that, oh, if My Hero Academia doesn't end in 2024 this time, then I will once again apologize. Really just showing that this is just something that happens to mangaka, and how many people believe that this would happen, but forget that mangaka very much underestimate how long a story will be. For example, such as Oda, for many years, has consistently said and given like examples and percentages, like One Piece is 75% done, One Piece is 80% done. And we as One Piece fans just look at him and like, yeah, that's definitely gonna happen. And it seems as if this has not been the case for Horikoshi. And we do know a fact that Horikoshi does have a tendency of underestimating how long the story will actually be, because he had a similar realization and discussion with this with Oda, and how we learned that the sports festival was actually going to be a lot shorter than what was intended, but because Horikoshi wanted to draw more stuff with it, it actually expanded. And a lot of the comments that Horikoshi also brings up is not that he wants My Hero Academia to end, but that he's looking forward to My Hero Academia's ending, and that is some of the favorite material that he wants to draw and write. Just because a mangaka says that they are looking forward to the end of a story does not make it rushed. Many writers want their stories to end so that they may have a complete story, or in the case of Horikoshi, they want to reach the end and tell the final parts of the story. So Hori, like Oda, were just excited to reach the end because that's the story that they wanted to tell the most. Also, if Horikoshi wanted to end the series immediately, he had many opportunities to do so if he wanted to and did not. And he didn't need to have an expanded epilogue, which is something that is even uncommon for shonen series as a whole. Typically, after the final fight, you may get a chapter or maybe 2 chapters that tell the aftermath of it right before we proceed to a time jump into the future in the final chapter. So by the fact that Horikoshi wanted to have an actual epilogue means that while the pacing may not be the best, that does not indicate that it's being rushed. And speaking of pacing, let's talk about the other half of how I define rushed, and how the ending of My Hero Academia to many people may seem to have ended abruptly and was moving too fast. And I will say this, there is some merit to the speed at which My Hero Academia was moving towards the end of the series, especially with the final act. But here's my perspective of this. The speed was nowhere near close to being too fast or just ending abruptly. To me, a series is more rushed when the pacing picks up out of nowhere and things get resolved too quickly. And while there are many examples of certain situations being handled quickly, such as the traitor reveal and the resolution of Mina's story arc from the First War, we can't ignore where things were given room to breathe, such as the Dark Deku arc. And seeing how society has fallen, or even how every major fight got a resolution that spanned over multiple chapters. If My Hero Academia was truly rushed, then instances in the final war of plot points being either completely skipped or barely touched will be more apparent, especially at the end, where Horikoshi spent multiple chapters of the heroes' fight against All For One and Tomura together. If Hori wanted to rush to the ending, then he would just gloss over completely smaller plot points such as Aoyama's fight, or skip immediately to Deku and Tomura fighting, ignoring all other battlegrounds. The ending act had an increase in speed, but the speed is typical to many series entering their final stories, such as Jujutsu Kaisen or even Black Clover. And now that we've brought up the plot points, this is probably a good point to talk about the ending being rushed, aka the lack of complexity and resolution of story beats and plot points. And while it is true that there are many plot points that may be underdeveloped or seemingly resolved too quickly, explanation of this is seen in Horikoshi's writings in the entire series. In a relatively recent interview, Horikoshi confirmed that he purposely left out story beats to allow for readers' imaginations to run free. This can be seen anytime we get a character's flashback, which is most likely 2 chapters at the bare minimum. Heck, he explicitly confirms that he has backstories for all of the previous users of One for All, and even enough backstory to cover an entire volume of Lady Nagin's backstory, but that he chooses not to add that information into his story. He seems to like to leave things open to interpretation, and that just seems to be his writing style. Now, that does not mean that Hori is a perfect writer. There are many instances where adding more detail would be appreciated and also improve the story pacing, such as a few chapters in between the start of both wars, to adding more characterization to some side characters, or maybe hinting at some plot points earlier on than in the final act, such as with other heroes such as Star and Stripe going to play major roles in the final war, even to the discrimination arc with Shoji, which could have been hinted more and more with added material, or even material that we saw within the movies. Heck, this may be the reasoning why the stories of My Hero Academia's movies are canon to the series of My Hero Academia. Nothing about them breaks the canon of My Hero Academia to any greater extent, but having them in the story could have improved the story's pacing as a whole. And we know that a lot of the ideas that goes into the stories and the movies of My Hero Academia are supervised by Horikoshi himself, to the point where the second movie was his initial rough draft to how he believed the ending of My Hero Academia would be like, which pretty much tracks for why the ending of My Hero Academia has Deku losing his quirk. And many of these would have just been major improvements to the story overall. But here's the thing. Suggestions that may improve the story does not mean that the story itself was rushed. Constructive criticism like this is important, but is not an excuse to accuse the series of being rushed. And with all of that, I just want to address 3 more points that may indicate that a story is being rushed: the pacing, time constraints, and the writer's health. And we already pretty much talked about the pacing of My Hero Academia and how it speeds up in the final act. However, the pacing of My Hero Academia has always been a little bit off due to the fact that there is a heavy focus on both the heroes and the students trying to be heroes in the field versus the more traditional classroom structure, where there is a slight consistent inconsistency of action and then a low point, action, then a low point. And that in the final act, it's very much more high point, high point, high point, action, 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 with very minimal slowdown, which is more traditional when it comes to more action-oriented shonen than what we've gotten with My Hero Academia. And talking about a pacing a little bit more, I will say that the feeling of it being rushed may be due to how the story was most likely hindered by the number of pages per chapters in the final act being between an average of 13 to 15, when the average manga chapters are typically 17 to 19 pages per chapter. This could have led to the increase in the speed as well as making the story feel rushed. And the decreased page count may also tie into another reason for why the story feels like it was rushed, which is Horikoshi's health. And I know, you've heard it many times before. Oh my gosh, the mangaka's health is degrading. Oh my gosh, the mangaka has back pain. But that is something very serious, and this is something that is not unique to Horikoshi himself, because this is not something new to manga and anime community when it comes to mangaka. It's a well-known open secret that being a mangaka is hard and has adverse effect on a person's health. We've seen it with mangaka like Togashi, Kubo, Oda, Horikoshi, and Gege as well. Heck, one of my favorite series that I got into, Ruri Dragon Maid's mangaka, immediately had to take a hiatus just by working on the manga for just a few months. But overall, the mangakas suffer in one way or another thanks to the grind of being a mangaka, either having crippling back problems like Togashi, which directly is responsible for why Hunter x Hunter has been on hiatus for however long it's been, or needing for eye surgery like Oda, which may be responsible for One Piece having a lower page count as well. Horikoshi has had many issues with his health, and many of those health problems has been seen via his author comments. And with all of this in mind, it's not hard to believe that because of Horikoshi's diminishing health, that My Hero Academia may have suffered and been rushed because of his health. However, there's no concrete evidence that confirms that Hori's health is caused for My Hero Academia being, quote, rushed. We would need that confirmation from Hori himself to make this conclusion. Hori would have to say that his health had a direct effect on the series' pacing as a whole. And that's kind of the big idea around everyone saying that My Hero Academia's ending is rushed. It's all speculation. While yes, we can make educated guesses on whether or not My Hero Academia was rushed, there is not enough evidence to prove it. With My Hero Academia, a lot of complaints about it and the ending being rushed are not really rooted in facts necessarily, but a feeling. Many people feel My Hero Academia is rushed, so they assume as much. Even with Bleach, we assumed that it was rushed because we got a confirmation of the series ending in 5 chapters like with My Hero Academia, but we see that this is most likely the standard practice of a series given 5 chapters before it ends because Jujutsu Kaisen got a similar treatment. And also the difference between that is that we also got confirmation afterwards that Kubo's health directly impacted the manga itself. We do not get that direct confirmation with Horikoshi, and that confirmation is added even more by changes in the anime and Kubo literally saying that there were things that he wanted to put in the anime and Kubo saying that there were things that he wanted to put in the manga that he couldn't due to his own health issues. Hori has not come out to even confirm any of that. Heck, the belief that he finished with My Hero Academia is weird because he's still drawing My Hero Academia characters on Twitter. Yes, I call it Twitter. Yes, I refuse to call it X because X marks the spot for the stupidest name you could call a website because it smells like a muskrat. But to go back to the main question, was the ending of My Hero Academia rushed? In all honesty, we just don't know. I highly doubt that it was, but we just don't know. The only one who knows is Horikoshi and Shonen Jump as a whole. Maybe we'll get more concrete answers like with Kubo or Togashi. Maybe we'll get the answers in the final volume. Heck, we may know in the next years or maybe never at all. We just have to accept the fact that we may never truly know if My Hero Academia's ending was actually rushed or not. All we can do is speculate, and that's fine. Because in reality, My Hero Academia is rushed if you think it is, or My Hero Academia is not rushed if you think it is. And to me, it being rushed, whether or not that is the case, does not take away from the story being great. Now, whether or not the ending is good or bad is a whole nother question for a whole nother video. But yeah, we may never know if My Hero Academia is rushed, and we may have no way to ask the man himself. If only there was someone brave enough to ask Hori a question like, I don't know, in a popularity poll of if My Hero Academia was rushed, but who would be stupid enough to do that? So yeah, this is my video discussion for whether or not My Hero Academia was rushed, and let me pose a question to you guys. Do you think that My Hero Academia was rushed? Leave your thoughts down below, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel for more content like this. Do all that cool jazz, and hopefully I'll be able to catch you in my next video. Goodbye!